We're reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Chapter 12 today. This book is by Lewis Carroll, and it's adapted by Debbie Guthery. And the illustrator is Jason Alexander. If you would like to, you can pause on the pictures so that you can view them a little bit longer, and then press play when you're ready to continue with the story. Here we go. The last chapter, Chapter 12, Alice's Evidence. "Here!" cried Alice, forgetting how large she had grown in the last few minutes. She jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt, sending all the jurymen onto the heads of the crowd below. There they lay, sprawling around. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed, and began picking them up again as fast as she could. "The trial cannot proceed," said the king in a very stern voice, "until all the jurymen are back in their proper places. All," he repeated, looking hard at Alice. Alice looked at the jury box and saw that she had put the lizard in head downward. The poor little thing was waving its tail all around, unable to move. Alice lifted it and put it right. After the jury had a moment to recover, they quickly started writing out the history of the accident. The lizard, too overcome to do anything, sat with its mouth open, gazing up into the roof of the court. "What do you know about this business?" the king said to Alice. "Nothing," said Alice. "Nothing whatever?" persisted the king. "Nothing whatever," said Alice. "That's very important," the king said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write this down on their slates when the White Rabbit interrupted. "Unimportant, your majesty means, of course," he said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. "Unimportant, of course I meant," the king said, and then went on mumbling to himself, "Important, unimportant, unimportant, important," as if he were trying to decide which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it down, important. And some, unimportant. Alice could see this, but it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this moment, the king, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, called out, "Silence!" and read out from his book. "Rule number 42, all persons more than a mile high must leave the court." Everybody looked at Alice. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the king. "Nearly 2 miles high," added the queen. "Well, I won't go," said Alice. "Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just now." "It's the oldest rule in the book," said the king. "Then it should be rule number 1, not number 42, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook. "Consider your verdict," he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. "There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty," said the White Rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry. "This paper has been picked up." "What's in it?" said the queen. "I haven't opened it yet," said the White Rabbit. "But it seems to be a letter written by the prisoner to somebody." "Whom is it to?" said one of the jurymen. "To no one at all," said the White Rabbit. "In fact, there's nothing written on the outside." He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added, "It isn't a letter at all. It's a set of verses." "Are they in the prisoner's handwriting?" asked another juryman. "No, they're not," said the White Rabbit. "And that's the strangest thing about it. He must have copied somebody else's handwriting," said the king. "Please, your majesty," said the knave, "I didn't write it, and they can't prove I did. There's no name signed at the end." "If you didn't sign it," said the king, "that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man." Everyone in the court started clapping. It was the first clever thing the king had said all day. "That proves he's guilty," said the queen. "It proves nothing," said Alice. "You don't even know what the verses are about." "Read them," said the king. The White Rabbit put on his glasses. "Where shall I begin, please your majesty?" he asked. "Begin at the beginning," the king said solemnly, "and go till you come to the end, then stop." There was silence while the White Rabbit read. "They told me you had been to her and mentioned him to me. She gave a good character, but said I could not swim." "He sent them word I had not gone, we know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her one, they gave him two, you gave us three or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he'd trust to you to set them free exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me." "That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet," said the king, rubbing his hands together. "So now let the jury—" "Is there anyone who can explain those verses?" asked Alice. She had grown so large in the last few minutes that she wasn't afraid of interrupting him. "I don't believe there's any meaning in it." The jury all wrote down on their slates, "She doesn't believe there's any meaning in it." "If there's no meaning in it," said the king, "that saves a lot of trouble, as we should not try to find any meaning. I don't know," he went on, spreading out the verses on his knee and looking at them with one eye. "I seem to see some meaning in them, after all. Said I could not swim. You can't swim, can you?" he added, turning to the knave. The knave shook his head sadly. "Do I look like it?" he said, which he certainly did not, being made entirely of cardboard. "All right so far," said the king, and he looked over the verses, talking to himself. "We know it to be true. That's the jury, of course. If she should push the matter on, that must be the queen. What would become of you? What, indeed? I gave her one, they gave me two. Why, that must be what he did with the tarts, you know. But it goes on. They all returned from him to you," said Alice. "And there they are," said the king, pointing at the tarts on the table. "Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit—" "You never have fits, my dear, I think," he said to the queen. "Never," said the queen furiously, throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke. "Then the words don't fit you," said the king, looking around the court with a smile. There was a dead silence. "It's a pun," the king added, and everyone laughed. "Let the jury give their verdict," the king said for about the 20th time that day. "No, no," said the queen. "Punishment first, verdict afterward." "Nonsense," said Alice loudly. "The idea of having the punishment first." "Hold your tongue," said the queen, turning purple. "I won't," said Alice. "Off with her head," the queen shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. "Who cares for you?" said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. "You are nothing but a pack of cards." Suddenly the whole pack rose up in the air and came flying down upon her. She screamed and tried to beat them off. Bloop! Then found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees into Alice's face. "Wake up, Alice dear," said her sister. "What a long sleep you've had." "Oh, I've had such a curious dream," said Alice. And she told her sister, as well as she could remember them, all the strange adventures of hers that you have just been reading about. When she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, "That was a curious dream, dear. Now run in and have your tea. It's getting late." So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister sat leaning her head on her hand, watching the setting sun and thinking of little Alice and all her adventures. With closed eyes, she thought back to her own youth. She half believed that she herself was in Wonderland, a bright-eyed little child once again, filled with simple joys and the curious, wonderful dreams of happy summer days. The end. We're finished! We did it! What did you think about the book? Put it in the comments on Google Classroom under this assignment.